Take a moment and imagine your bedroom. It is early in the morning. The room is completely dark. It is quiet. You are wrapped in a warm, soft blanket. Your eyes are closed, and you are deep in a peaceful dream. You feel safe, and you feel rested. And then suddenly, everything changes. A sound breaks the silence. Maybe it is a loud, sharp beep. Beep, beep. Or maybe it is a digital melody playing from your smartphone. Your eyes open, your heart beats a little faster. You reach out your hand in the dark, trying to find the device. You press a button to make the noise stop. You take a deep breath. It is time to wake up. It is time to start the day. This is a moment that almost everyone in the modern world shares. We all know this feeling. We know the heavy feeling in our eyes. We know the deep human desire for just 5 more minutes of sleep. We often hate our alarm clocks. We complain about them. We hide them under our pillows. But here is the truth. Modern society could not exist without them. Without the alarm clock, there would be no train schedules. There would be no early morning flights. Schools, hospitals, and busy offices would fall into chaos. We have built our entire world around waking up at exact specific times. But humans are not biologically built to wake up at exact times in the dark. Our bodies do not naturally know what 6:30 in the morning is. This is the story of how humans went from sleeping peacefully with the natural light of the sun to inventing machines that force us awake. It is a story of fire, water, falling metal, flying dried vegetables, and the strange, forgotten jobs that existed before the digital screen. This is the forgotten history of the alarm clock. Before we had screens, batteries, and ticking machines, people slept very differently. In the ancient world, life was guided by nature. People woke up with the sunrise, and they went to sleep when the moon came out. Time was not a strict grid. Time was not divided into tiny perfect minutes and seconds. Time was a flowing river. It was a feeling. It was the changing temperature of the air. It was the sound of a rooster crowing in the distance. Human bodies have a natural system. It is called a circadian rhythm. This is a biological clock inside your brain. When the sky grows dark, your brain produces a chemical that makes you feel tired. You naturally want to close your eyes. When the sun rises and paints the sky with bright morning light, your brain stops producing that chemical. You naturally wake up. For thousands of years, this was enough. People worked on farms. They worked with the seasons. They did not need to catch a train at exactly 7:14 in the morning. But sometimes, even in the ancient world, people needed to wake up before the sun. Warriors needed to wake up early for battle. Hunters needed to wake up in the dark to catch animals. How did they do it without a clock? They used a very primitive, very natural, and very uncomfortable method. It is sometimes called the overhydration method. Before going to sleep, Native American warriors and early cowboys would drink a massive amount of water. They would drink cup after cup until their stomachs were completely full. Then they would go to sleep. A few hours later, their own biology would wake them up. Their bladders would be so full that the physical discomfort would force them to open their eyes and get out of bed in the pitch black of night. It was not a pleasant way to wake up, but it was incredibly effective. Their own bodies became the very first alarm clocks. But humanity is always curious. We are always trying to invent new things. We did not just want to measure time. We wanted to control it. We wanted a machine to do the work for us. In ancient China and the Middle East, inventors created a brilliant and simple time machine. It was called the candle clock. Imagine a tall, thick wax candle. The inventors knew exactly how long it took for the wax to melt. If a candle melted 1 inch every hour, they could use it to measure time. But how could a candle wake you up? They came up with a clever trick. If a person wanted to sleep for exactly 4 hours, they would measure 4 inches down the candle. Then they would take a heavy metal iron nail and push it deep into the side of the wax. They would place a metal pan on the table right below the candle. Then they would light the fire and go to sleep. For 4 hours, the room was quiet. The fire slowly melted the wax. Drip, drip, drip. Finally, the wax melted all the way down to the heavy iron nail. The wax could no longer hold the metal. The nails slipped out and fell through the air. It hit the metal pan below with a loud, sharp crash. Clang! The sudden noise echoed through the room, waking the sleeper instantly. It was a time machine made of fire and gravity. Thousands of miles away in ancient Greece, another brilliant mind was working on a different kind of alarm clock. There lived a very famous philosopher named Plato. Plato was a great teacher. He had many students who wanted to learn from him. But Plato had a problem. His students were lazy. They were always late for his early morning lectures. Plato needed a way to force them out of bed. Plato looked at a device called a water clock or a clepsydra. A water clock used two large jars. Water would slowly drip from the top jar into the bottom jar. People used it to measure time by looking at the water level. But Plato adapted this machine. He added a sealed container, lead balls, and a narrow tube. He engineered it so that when the water reached a specific level in the middle of the night, it rapidly pushed a large amount of air through the narrow tube. The result was a loud, high-pitched whistling sound. It sounded just like a boiling tea kettle screaming in the dark. When Plato's whistling water clock went off, his students had no choice but to wake up, get dressed, and hurry to their classes. As centuries passed, the world changed. We entered the Middle Ages. In Europe, the need to wake up early became deeply tied to religion. In heavy stone monasteries, monks needed to wake up in the pitch dark for their morning prayers. They could not use a water clock in the winter because the water would freeze to ice. So, they built massive, heavy mechanical tower clocks. These were giant machines made of iron gears and heavy weights. They did not have faces with numbers yet. They only had one job: to ring giant heavy bells that echoed across the entire village, calling the monks to pray. But these machines were huge. They belonged to the whole town. You could not keep one in your bedroom. For a personal private alarm clock, we had to wait until the year 1787. In the United States, there was a man named Levi Hutchins. Levi was a clockmaker. He was a very serious, hard-working man. His rule was that he must wake up at exactly 4 o'clock in the morning, every single day, to start his work. But sometimes he slept too late. This made him very angry. He decided to use his skills to fix the problem. Levi built a beautiful pine wood box. Inside the box, he put brass gears. He attached a small bell. He engineered the gears so that the bell would ring loudly. He had invented the first American mechanical alarm clock. But there was a hilarious flaw in Levi's design. Levi Hutchins only wanted to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So he built the clock so it could only ring at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was completely fixed. You could not change the time. If you wanted to wake up at 6 o'clock, the clock was useless to you. Levi never even tried to patent his invention. He could not imagine that anyone else in the world would ever want to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so he thought the machine was only useful for himself. But soon the whole world would need to wake up early. The 1800s brought the Industrial Revolution. This was a massive change in human history. People stopped working on green farms and moved to dirty, crowded, noisy cities. They went to work in large factories full of dangerous machines and dark coal smoke. The factories ran on strict schedules. They were controlled by the harsh blow of the factory whistle. If you were a worker and you arrived late, you would lose your wages for the day. If you were late too many times, you would lose your job entirely. And if you lost your job, your family would go hungry. Being on time was no longer just about being polite. It was a matter of survival. But there was a major problem. Mechanical alarm clocks existed, but they were a luxury. They were beautiful handmade machines that only rich people could afford. The poor factory workers did not have the money to buy an alarm clock. So, how did they wake up in the dark before the sun to get to the factories on time? The answer was a brand new human profession. A new job was born in the streets of Britain and Ireland. They were called the knocker-uppers. A knocker-upper was a human alarm clock. For a few pennies a week, you could hire a person to come to your house every morning and wake you up. It sounds simple, but it was actually quite difficult. A knocker-upper could not just walk up to your front door and knock loudly with their fist. If they knocked on the heavy wooden door, The loud noise would wake up the entire street. They would be waking up the neighbors for free. They had to be quiet. They had to be precise. They had to wake up only their paying customer. Because the workers lived in crowded, tall buildings, their bedrooms were usually on the second or third floor. So, the knocker-uppers carried long, heavy bamboo fishing poles. At the end of the pole, they sometimes attached a piece of wire or a heavy knot of wood. They would walk down the dark, freezing streets at 4 or 5 in the morning. They would stand under their customer's window, reach up with the long pole, and gently tap against the glass. Tap, 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 with the long pole, Tap, 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 woo. They would not leave until they saw the face of the worker in the window, proving that they were awake and getting out of bed. There were many famous knocker-uppers. In East London, there was an older woman named Mary Smith. Mary did not use a long bamboo pole. Instead, she used a long hollow rubber tube. She carried a bag full of dried peas. She would put a dried pea into the tube, aim it directly at her customer's second-story window, and blow hard. The dried pea would fly through the air and hit the glass with a sharp thwack. Thwack, thwack. Mary Smith would shoot dried peas at the windows until the sleepy workers finally opened their eyes and turned on a light. But hearing this story always creates a great paradox. It creates a question that everyone asks: who woke up the knocker-upper? If the knocker-upper had to be at work at 3 in the morning, how did they wake up without an alarm clock? The answer is quite simple. Knocker-uppers were usually night owls. They were often people who worked night jobs, like bakers or police officers. Instead of waking up early, they simply stayed awake all night. They did their knocking in the early morning and then they went home to sleep while the rest of the city worked during the day. Their schedule was completely reversed. The knocker-uppers were a vital part of the city. They were the human bridge between the agricultural age and the modern age. But like many old professions, they were eventually defeated by technology. In the year 1847, a French inventor named Antoine Ridier changed the world again. He finally patented the first adjustable mechanical alarm clock. This was the breakthrough. Now, a person could turn a dial and choose exactly what time the bell would ring. You didn't have to wake up at 4 in the morning like Levi Hutchins. You could choose 6 o'clock or 7:30. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, mass production took over. Companies began to build clocks in giant factories using cheap materials. They began making affordable wind-up clocks and eventually electric clocks that plugged into the wall. Suddenly, the alarm clock was no longer a luxury for the rich. It was a cheap tool that every worker could afford to keep on their nightstand. As cheap clocks filled every home, the human alarm clocks faded away. The beloved knocker-uppers walked the dark streets less and less. The tapping of bamboo poles and the flying of dried peas stopped. The profession died out completely, becoming a forgotten casualty of modern convenience. But the machines kept evolving. In the 1950s, clockmakers introduced a feature that would change our mornings forever. They invented the snooze button. The snooze button is a fascinating piece of history on its own. Have you ever noticed that when you press snooze, the alarm usually pauses for exactly 9 minutes, not 10? Why 9 minutes? When the engineers were designing the first mechanical snooze gears in the 1950s, they had a physical limitation. They had to fit the new gear into the existing clock mechanics. The gear teeth could not align to pause the clock for exactly 10 minutes. The math simply did not work with the space they had. They had to choose between a little more than 10 minutes or a little less. They decided that 10.5 minutes was too long. The person might fall deeply back to sleep and be late for work. So they chose the shorter option. They engineered the gear to pause for exactly 9 minutes. Today, even though our digital phones don't have physical metal gears, many tech companies still program their default snooze timers to exactly 9 minutes, honoring that physical limitation from the 1950s. From the 1950s, technology moved fast. We got the glowing red digital numbers of the 1980s. We got radio alarms waking people up to the loud voices of morning DJs and pop music. And eventually, we got the smartphone. The smartphone absorbed the alarm clock, just like it absorbed the camera, the map, and the calendar. Today, our alarm clocks are smarter than ever. We have modern irony in our technology. Because humans are so good at turning off our alarms and going back to sleep, we have invented alarms that fight back. There are apps that force you to solve complex math problems before the noise stops. There are physical clocks on wheels that literally roll off your nightstand and run away, hiding under your bed, so you have to physically get up and chase them to turn them off. We have spent thousands of years inventing machines to wake us up, and now we invent machines to stop us from ignoring the machines we invented. The history of the alarm clock is really a story about control. The alarm clock allowed us to build global businesses. It allowed us to coordinate airplanes across oceans. It allowed us to organize complex, modern life where millions of people move together in perfect harmony. But it also severed our deep natural connection to the sun. It separated us from our own biological need for rest. So, tomorrow morning, when that annoying sound goes off in the dark, when you feel that heavy grogginess and desperately want to hit the snooze button, do not just be angry at the machine. Take a brief moment to remember the long journey that brought you to this morning. Remember the Native American warriors drinking water by the fire. Remember the heavy iron nails falling into metal pans in ancient China. Remember the screaming water whistles of ancient Greece and the heavy monastery bells ringing in the snow. Remember the dedicated knocker-uppers walking the foggy streets of London with their bamboo poles and dried peas. Remember Levi Hutchins and his stubborn 4 o'clock wooden box. When you reach out your hand to silence that beep, you are not just starting your day. You are participating in thousands of years of human history. You are touching the result of our endless, fascinating struggle to capture time, control nature, and force the world to wake up.